Hello, I'm giving a brief video because I've been really sick for the last few days and I really don't want to watch anything and I might go crazy. So to introduce this, simply I'm going to give a slight response to the absolutely horrible comments made by Peterson, Mr. Peterson, in the most recent Zizek versus Peterson debate argument. I will just have to say Zizek is terrible at debate, but he completely wipes the floor with Mr. Peterson, and I'm just going to just roll through them because I want to do something that may be of some interest or use to someone, and I'm very sick and I'm very tired of watching Netflix. So first, uh, Mr. Peterson claims that Marxists didn't grapple with one fundamental truth, that all ideas are wrong, or most ideas are wrong, and typically a thinker has a thought and he accepts it's true. That fundamentally fails to understand what the Communist Manifesto is. It was written as a political document for the League of the Just, then the Communist League. The Communist Manifesto was to serve as a rallying cry for radicals, and it actually missed the major impact of the 1848 revolutions, except in Germany. But it was eventually an important founding document that became a general text for wider radical revolution in general. And it's above all meant to be a political text for political action, which means the Communist Manifesto must be judged by what it does. And we'll kind of touch on this later. Mr. Peterson basically has no idea what it says or what it has done, and I find it stunning to think that he's actually read this, which is strange because theoretically it's the core of his argument. But I find it odd that this is it. His big critique of the Communist Manifesto, completely ignoring wage, labor, capital, Capital Volume 1, 2, or 3, even unpublished texts, which would make as much sense or more sense, the German ideology, any of these things. But he decides to go to town on the Communist Manifesto. That's not what historians do, and it's not what philosophers do. Strange, it's not even what people forming political arguments do, but this is what he does, and one would have to question why he tackles a text that at absolute best, is strong and rigorous for a high school AP European student. But why he chooses that text to argue with arguably one of the most well-written, well-read, whatever you may think of him, Marxist philosophers of our time, is beyond me. And he is through many ways he does his best to browbeat. Presumably he would browbeat other people, but he tries to browbeat Zizek. And Zizek basically is like, oh, well, you're also here, and Zizek is Zizek. It's fine. But I don't know why he chose this. I don't know why he chose to prep so incompletely, so smallly, and why he didn't even prep using the document he cites. I don't know. He's an idiot. That's what I've got going on now. So he says he's only going to deal with 8 main points of the Marxist text, of the points of Marxists. He's ambiguous purposefully, because it lets him off the hook. And I get 12 main points. And I will characterize them with very much less enthusiasm as it goes on. So first off, he says history. Communists say history is to be viewed as economic struggle, but in fact, history is hierarchical struggle. That's the truth of it? It's biology itself. People arrange themselves in competition, and that exists in the animal kingdom. This grossly mischaracterizes understanding of Marxism in general, the basic meaning of economics, and the animal kingdom's so-called hierarchies in regard to it. First off, Marxism is not simply economics, it's political economy. What do we mean? I could give you a big David Harvey, this and Marxism says this and this and this. I'm giving a very childlike understanding of Marxism to deal with childlike arguments. So basically, it's the economy, which is what stuff is made, and it's politics of who gets the stuff. And obviously, that's a gross simplification. Light years more advanced than his understanding, but whatever. Now, certainly, people do things for other reasons besides what's made, and you'd be hard pressed to view humanity in the history of treaties, colonization, war and peace, and you find strong, compelling reasons that sweep over society that these are the basic reasons. But if you want to say there exist reasons besides, you would need to argue for them, which Mr. Peterson does not do at all. And I know you can quote, well, he says this and that. Making assertions isn't an argument. So I would like to, if someone later wants to comment, well, he argues for this and this, I'd like to get that as an argument, which would include the premises and the conclusion. And I'll be generous. Two premises that are like remotely linked, and then a conclusion that's kind of linked, certainly would not pass muster in a first level philosophy logic class. But really, that would be a high bar, a really good argument he made relative to the rest, and so I'm open to that. Then, in addition, if you want to say there are reasons, you would need to argue, I'm sorry. Moreover, he names that there are numerous hierarchies, which there certainly are. But what's not certain is that they're all competitive. Plenty of hierarchies exist which are mutually beneficial. Such a cliche as the bird who cleans the alligator's teeth, and the alligator doesn't eat the bird. It's really stupid, it's really simple, it's really obvious, and it's really cliche, which makes me only wonder why he couldn't get that basic thing down. Yeah, but this is fundamentally flawed in the Marxist view of history, which is generally correct, depending on which sort of Marxism you follow or think or believe or read. But regardless, he's required to give an argument to be taken seriously, but he doesn't. He doesn't give any argument. He shouldn't be taken seriously, and it's incredibly poorly done. The next is these structures of hierarchical organization predate capitalism. Human beings struggle with more than just class struggle, but they struggle with themselves. They struggle against their own implicit evil. They're struggling against nature, which does not seem to show up in Marxism. Now that's not only wrong, that's stupid. From the dialectics of nature, with men we enter history. Animals also have a history, that of their derivation and gradual evolution to their present form. This history, however, is made for them, and insofar as they themselves take part of it, this occurs without their knowledge or desire. On the other hand, the more that human beings become removed from the animals in a narrow sense of the word, the more they make their own history consciously, the less they become less becomes the influence of unseen effects, uncontrolled forces of this history, and the more accurately does the historical result correspond to the aim laid down in advance. Now, I found this by searching for struggle and history on Marxist.org, and I found this, and it was the least wordy, most kind of apt one. But you really could just go with the Communist Manifesto, which in the very first section, Marx says the bourgeoisie during its scarce 100 years has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than all preceding generations together. Subjugation of nature's forces to man, machinery, applications of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier centuries had even the presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor. So right here you see it's the interplay between Marxism and history. You can read Capital Volume 1 or any number of Marxist works. The sort of stupid raw material, which may or may not be imminent to Marxism, regardless, it's there. And he just says it's not there, and I don't know how you could come up with that. I don't know whether he's really stupid and unread and doesn't know what he's talking about, or whether he's purposefully lying. I suspect he's purposefully lying, but I don't know. And, it doesn't really matter to me. Next, he says the primary conflict of human beings deals with the, and this is where Marxism is wrong, mind you, it deals with the struggle for life in a cruel and harsh natural world. Once again, this is incredibly stupid. It just shows that Mr. Peterson has troubles with reading, let alone the Communist Manifesto, not even counting more difficult Marxist works. The fundamental point of the natural world is that it no longer in humanity's primary mode of engagement, which is not to say we can't have hurricanes, earthquakes, and forest fires, but rather to say the vast majority of humanity's deaths are through preventable things, frequently starvation, malnutrition, or basic access to healthcare. We, to a certain extent, and I'm surprised Dr. Zizek didn't bring this up, we actually have much more effect over our natural world than even in Marx's time. And in Marx's time, he wrote extensively about the natural world, raw materials. I don't know how. I'm debating where Mr. Peterson's intellectual dishonesty and just blatant stupidity actually the line is. The answer is it's all of them, either blatant stupidity or just absolute intellectual dishonesty. But I don't know or care where that distinction is. And then he talks about how we come into this world starving and lonesome. That's idiotic in the extreme. Because if we're born into hierarchies, we don't come into the world lonesome. And I don't know where he gets this. He's trying to make this point, well, we're all born individually. Unless you are a wolf child born somewhere completely devoid of human contact, you're born into society. So I don't know why he would make this stupid claim, which he should know as a psychologist, not a particularly good psychologist, but even as a basic psychologist, he should know and understand this and make that claim. But I don't know why he makes it. Again, whether it's stupidity or ignorance, it's not my place to say. Furthermore, he idiotically says people don't primarily rise to position of power or seek positions of power. This is idiotic. It's extremely idiotic because his very next multiple arguments he drones on about this for a while, is that Marxism leads to the proletariat and Stalinists taking power, to which I'm like, whatever, which I'll deal with in a second. But he I don't understand why he says people don't rise to power, and I'm just dealing with this argument on its cuff, on just basic Google. At this point, you'll have to wonder if he consciously knows he's lying. In about 10 seconds research, the Waltons, Koch, and Mars have a combined wealth of more than 40 million American families. And this was clearly well documented. It was multiple sources, multiple sites. Forbes has roughly 100. It listed two groups of people that have either they are primarily inherited wealth, or they have significant inherited wealth, and that equals about half, more or less, half of the Forbes 400. So I don't know why he would say this. It's blatantly a lie. It is, and so I don't know why he thinks this would be convincing to anyone. I don't know why Zizek doesn't hammer him on this. It's fine. This is not a new or unique problem. Trump, he comes from inherited wealth. The Clintons come from inherited wealth. George W. Bush, inherited wealth and power. Of course, his father, inherited wealth and power from Prescott Bush. I don't know why he makes this claim. It's really dumb. It's a really stupid claim, and he's stupid for making it, at least publicly. I guess when he's talking to his own, and which he is primarily used to, then he can make whatever claim he wants, and then they don't care. But it's on its face, it's prima facie ridiculous, and he should really be ashamed. He should be embarrassed, really, to make that claim. But that's fine. He does that. He also makes a claim. Marx assumes a binary between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and he makes a big deal of this. Oh, the proletariat, Marx claims, is all good, and the bourgeoisie are all evil. Once again, this is an absolute lie. It's found right there in the Communist Manifesto. Marx says of this capitalist age, and I quote, "Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinct feature. As simplified class antagonisms, society as a whole is more and more splitting into two great hostile camps, into two great classes facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat." That does not mean that there are only two classes. In fact, other classes play an immense role for Marx and for, ironically, other Marxists, which he talks about kulaks, but doesn't talk about how there's Marxists have, for whatever reason, they generally still see multiple classes that exist. But it's right there in the 18th of Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. He explicitly talks about the role of the petit bourgeois, or their failure, parliamentary, and the lumpen throwing their weight behind the dictatorship. This is clear. The 18th of Brumaire is not a hidden Marxist work. It was published. It was widespread. If you're a Marxist scholar, you know the 18th of Brumaire. If you're vaguely familiar with Marx, you know the 18th of Brumaire. If you don't know it, you know it exists. So where he claims that Marx is an incredible reductivist, there are really various academics who argue for the reductive nature of Marx. There's many indigenous activists that claim holds weight. Their claim is much better, much more sophisticated, and completely unrelated to the Mr. Peterson's. I'm sorry, utterly idiotic, moronic attempt to characterize Marx as that. And it boggles my mind that he would go to this not having any knowledge of that. But it's fine. He apparently doesn't need to prepare for these debates because he's an idiot and he has support of institutional power, and it's fine. Um, Once again, he claims this is claim 9. He talks about the kulaks. Everything he says about the kulaks pretty much is stupid and idiotic. The kulaks weren't a well-to-do class, or well-to-do peasant was, they didn't have to work other people's lands, whereas most of the peasants had to work lands, and the lands that they had to work were the kulaks. He basically just makes a bunch of stuff up. I'm sure he Googled it, possibly, or he had his assistants Google it. It's basically all just false, and it's not really worth time talking about. Once again, he makes a claim. Marx makes he claims Marx says the proletariat have everything good and the bourgeois have everything bad. Once again, we find Mr. Peterson doesn't know. I think at this point doesn't even care if he knows what he's talking about. So here we go. He says this is from the Communist Manifesto. Here's a quote at length from the Communist Manifesto. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations. Actually, I look at this. It's the same quote. Like, there's no way. It's like right there in the front, like third paragraph or something like that. Marx just says it's the bourgeoisie are the most productive element of human history hitherto. So why he keeps making this claim, I don't know. I suspect it's because he's a liar, and he thinks that by saying it a lot, he can repeat it enough that people will read into it some sort of nuance. There's not any nuance, and I really think it's really pitiful, but that's fine. He says that communists say that capitalists drive down wages, and this didn't happen. It did. I don't know what he's talking about. In fact, that was one of Marx's main arguments about the rise of capitalism. If you look at the real wages of earners, they begin to go up in the 30s, occasionally, depending on location. They go up in the 30s, and the reason why is because of the labor struggles. That is to say, the communists and labor movement leaders were fighting for better wages. Their actual wage increase of actual purchasing power is relatively small. You've seen very little of it happen around the world, which he claims you have. Of course, he fails to mention that most of the gains from the vast majority of workers happen in China, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And Laos. I'm sorry, and Laos. But he's just an idiot. You merely have to look at actual wages over time. There was the 30s were a period of intense class struggle. You had, unfortunately, somewhat of a class compromise that happened through the 40s, through World War II, and then you had somewhat of a class compromise. That's to say, there was class collaboration on those who should have fought for the working class, and there was a willingness to compromise for those who were against the working class. And that can really be exemplified historically. Numerous books talk about the end of World War II, the rise in actual wages, and these aren't even communist historians, but like just basic economic history. It shows wages continue to rise until the 70s, in which case they sharply fall. You have stagflation, and then you don't really have the same increase in wages ever again. We still have not seen a real increase in wages significantly in quite some time. And how he doesn't know this when it's basic macroeconomics. It's not macroeconomics 101. It's like history of macro 201. I don't know. I think it's because he doesn't care when he says things because he's an idiot. Whether or not the reason he says things that are wrong is because he's an idiot or because he's a liar, it's up to you to make your choice. Next, he says he makes a large argument of how the proletariat are put in place to replace the capitalist class. Now, this is incredibly vague and incredibly stupid. He says, well, if you replace the capitalist class with these proletarians, it's not at all clear that that things will get better. Okay, it's not. Also, who do I think is better running the factory? Do I think it's someone who has actually worked in the factory and who has seen what goes on in the factory? Or do I think it's some rich asshole who lives in New York who invests on the stock market? That's really it. His argument carries no weight, no nuance. It's basically one of the most superficial straw men I've ever seen, but that's okay. And here the Communist Manifesto remains vague. The Paris Commune, various Paris communes were how Marx viewed communism as being victorious. You have different views of how to have a successful revolution. I, of course, take the Marxist-Leninist view that it's a statewide thing. But I'm open and receptive to other forms of Marxism. And let's grant him, and I don't believe this by any means, but let's grant him that Stalin was all the evil monster that everyone assumes he was. The fact of the matter is, the capitalist class offered worse forms of evil. Hitler, Mussolini, Churchill. It's very clear that of all of those, Stalin was by far the best. So I don't know what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about, which is he's lying, and not very well at that. But furthermore, to argue concretely that the current system of capitalism did better at selecting leaders than socialist systems would mean that Trump is the best leader since he's the leader of the free world, whereas, say, Cuba, which has had a Castro leading it, not in power exactly, but leading it, isn't good. But it's just prima facie false. Why Zizek doesn't hammer on this, I know perfectly why. You know perfectly why. He's a philosopher who plays fast and loose with history. He likes stories that fit what he wants it to say. What he doesn't want is to look at the concrete truth. You can see capitalism has killed 100 million in India alone. And that's just one small part of the British Empire. We're not talking about Africa. We're not talking about other parts of Asia. If you line bodies up, which is a very macabre way of judging the goods of a social system, communism wins hands down, it's not a hard argument to make. It's really clear, really simple. But, it is what it is. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed it because it meant I got to be sick giving this presentation and not sick watching Netflix. So thank you very much for your time.